In a town where judgment cuts deeper than knives, a young woman was cast out for carrying a child no one wanted. For years, she faced the harshest winds alone until a silent stranger rode into her life, offering a hand steadier than the coldest nights. This isn't just a story of pain and survival. It's a tale of fierce courage, broken pasts, and the quiet strength that claims a new life against all odds. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from, and if these raw, real stories move you, make sure to subscribe. Now, lean in close. The West's harsh truths are about to unfold. I still remember the taste of dust that morning. It clung to my tongue like guilt, sharp and bitter, scratching my throat every time I tried to swallow. The wind had a way of scraping through the bones of our town, prying at doors, whispering things we all pretended not to hear. But even that wind, wild and hungry, couldn't carry away what had already settled in folks' hearts, the quiet kind of hate that grows when fear takes root. They watched me kneel in the dirt of the square, belly swollen beneath a dress too thin for winter, hair tangled and face bruised from my father's boots. But no one stepped forward, no one spoke. They just stared, eyes darting away when I dared meet them, as if my shame might catch and stain them too. My father's breath came in ragged bursts behind me, the fury in him burning hot enough to warm the whole damn square. But it wasn't warmth anyone wanted. I'd stopped crying weeks before. Tears felt like a waste of water in a place where nothing grew except regret and stories folks told over whiskey. What broke inside me stayed broken, but what hardened stayed that way too. I clutched my belly with one hand, felt the little life turning inside, and wondered what it would know of love when all it saw was hate. The world didn't slow down for my pain. The sun still rose, throwing long shadows that made every face look harsher. The saloon doors creaked on their hinges. The church bell hung silent, even God too tired to speak, I guessed. My father's voice cut through the hush. "Stand up, girl," he snarled. His boot slammed into my ribs, and something inside me folded in on itself. But I didn't scream, not anymore. In that moment, with dust swirling around my face and blood dripping from my lip, I felt something colder than fear, emptiness, like my soul had stepped back, too ashamed to stay and watch. But then I heard hoofbeats, slow, deliberate, as if someone dared to take their time in a place that swallowed mercy. A figure appeared at the edge of town, dust coat trailing like a shadow come to life. He dismounted without hurry, tying his horse to the rail outside the mercantile. Folks turned, curiosity breaking through the walls they'd built inside themselves. He walked forward, boots sinking into the dust, each step heavy with stories I didn't know yet. When he stopped a few feet away, the brim of his hat hid his eyes, but I felt the weight of his gaze settle on me. Not pity, not disgust, just seeing. And for a moment, I remembered what it felt like to be looked at without being judged. He offered his hand. No words, no hero speech, just a hand, rough and steady. And though my fingers trembled, I placed them in his. The warmth of his skin felt like the first true thing I'd touched in months. He pulled me gently to my feet and my knees buckled, but he didn't let go. I leaned against him, breathing dust and pain, but also something I hadn't felt in so long I barely recognized it, hope. Behind me, my father spat words soaked in shame and fury. "She's mine, my blood." But the stranger's voice was quiet, steady as the earth itself. "She don't belong to you no more." No one moved, not the marshal watching from the saloon awning, arms folded and eyes cold, not the townsfolk peeking from windows, wanting to see but not to act, just the wind tugging at my hair, as if urging me to go. The stranger shrugged off his coat and draped it over my shoulders. It smelled of pine smoke and rain-soaked roads, of places far from here. My father's voice cracked behind me, but no sound could stop the weight of that coat from settling around me, soft and grounding. He helped me toward his horse. I didn't ask where we were going. I didn't care. I only knew that standing still meant dying slow in shame and pain. When he lifted me onto the saddle, his hands were careful, never touching my belly, as if he saw the life I carried as something worth protecting. He swung up behind me, one arm guiding the reins, the other steady at my side but never caging me in. We turned east, away from town, and the voices behind us grew small, then silent. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Some part of me had already buried that place like a grave best left unvisited. The ride was slow. Each hoofbeat thudded through me, pain blooming fresh along my ribs. But I stayed upright, leaning against him because my strength had run out miles ago. He didn't speak, didn't ask. Just let the silence fill the space between us like something sacred. We passed frost-bitten pines standing guard over the road, their branches heavy with secrets they'd never tell. My breath fogged in the cold, but his presence beside me felt like a fire I didn't have to tend. When his cabin appeared at the base of a ridge mall, weathered smoke curling from the chimney, it didn't look like salvation, just shelter. And in that moment, shelter felt like a miracle. He helped me down. My legs buckled, but his hand caught me before I fell. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and quiet. There was no woman's touch, but nothing cruel either. A quilt folded at the end of a narrow bed, a lantern by the window, a space that felt like it'd been waiting without knowing for what. He left me by the hearth, pouring water into a tin basin. When he knelt and held out a wet cloth, he didn't force it on me. He just offered letting me choose. My fingers closed around the cloth. Pressing it to my cheek made fresh tears sting my eyes, but I still didn't let them fall. "Hungry?" he asked. The first word he'd spoken to me since that square. I nodded, my voice gone somewhere I couldn't reach. He ladled stew into a wooden bowl, placed it on the table beside a slice of cornbread. Then he stepped outside, closing the door with a soft click that felt more gentle than anything I'd known in months. I ate slowly. Each bite felt like reminding my body it still mattered. When the bowl was empty, I saw a small folded cloth on a shelf. I stood, knees shaking, and lifted it. A baby blanket, faded blue, letters stitched in the corner SJ. My breath caught, not for what it meant, but for what it might have meant to him. Lost leaves marks even when it's folded away. When he returned with firewood, he didn't ask if I'd seen the blanket. He just placed the wood beside the hearth and said, "The bed's yours. I'll take the porch." His voice held no argument, just quiet certainty. I opened my mouth, wanting to ask why. Why help me? Why care? But the words wouldn't come. That night, I lay curled on one side, hand resting on the life turning slow inside me. And for the first time since the town spat me out, I whispered to the child in my belly, "You're not a sin, you're mine." I woke to the hush of pine trees whispering against the roof, the air inside the cabin still and cold enough to fog my breath. For a moment, lying there with the quilt pulled to my chin, I forgot where I was. Then the ache along my ribs reminded me, pain always knows how to call your memory home. I pushed myself upright, one hand on my belly. The baby moved, slow and heavy, like turning in sleep. Outside the window, dawn brushed the sky with pale gray. Smoke curled from the chimney, thin and fragile as a prayer. When I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my toes touched a braided rug I hadn't noticed the night before. Small kindness, placed there without words. My heart clenched at the thought. He'd thought about my waking, about my feet meeting the cold floor. Care doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just waits quietly for you to see it. I shuffled to the hearth. The embers from last night glowed under a layer of ash. On the table sat a tin mug, steam rising from it. Beside it, a note in rough handwriting, "Drink. I'll be back soon." No name signed. He didn't need to. His silence spoke louder than names. The tea was bitter, herbal, warming me from the inside. My hand trembled around the mug, not from cold, but from something old, a fear that kindness might vanish if I dared believe in it. I walked the small room, the quilt on the bed, hand-stitched but worn. A shelf with a few tins of dried beans, flour, coffee. The baby blanket still folded, waiting for a story I hadn't heard. Every corner of this cabin felt lived in, yet marked by emptiness, like a space built for two that had learned to live with one. When the door creaked open, my chest tightened, but it was only him. His coat was dusted with frost, boots carrying mud and pine needles. He carried a bundle of firewood under one arm, moving without hurry, as if he knew rushing fixed nothing. "Morning," he said, voice low. I nodded. My voice felt buried somewhere deep, still too bruised to dig out. He placed the wood near the hearth, kneeling to stack it properly. "You sleep any?" he asked, eyes not quite meeting mine. "Some," I whispered, surprised by the sound of my own words. He nodded once, as if that single syllable meant everything he needed to hear. Then he turned, hands braced on his knees, and looked at me, really looked. Not at the bruise on my cheek or the dirt along my hem, but at me, the part that hadn't broken. "You can stay here," he said. "Long as you want. Ain't much, but it's yours too, if you need it." His words settled into me slow, like water soaking dry ground. I almost said thank you. Instead, I just held his gaze, hoping he'd see how much it meant. Maybe he did. Silence hung between us, soft, almost comforting. Days passed in quiet rhythm. Each morning he rose before light, tending the fire, bringing in water from the well. I moved slow around the cabin, sweeping, boiling wash water, folding shirts that smelled of smoke and leather. I watched his hands, scarred and steady, fixing the loose hinge on the pantry door, mending a broken chair leg. He never spoke of why he did these things, and I never asked. At night, after supper, he'd step outside, standing still beneath the stars. Sometimes I watched him through the window, wondering what ghosts kept him company out there. The wind would catch the hem of his coat, making it dance around his boots. And though the porch stood between us, it felt like a kind of nearness, neither of us reaching, but neither turning away. One evening, I found a rocking chair by the hearth that hadn't been there before. Sanded smooth, curved at the back. No words, no explanation, just there, waiting. My throat tightened. No one had ever given me something without expecting something in return. He caught my glance that night. "I'll stain it come spring," he murmured, voice rough. "Don't," I said softly, surprising even myself. "I like it plain." Our eyes met across the small room, and in that quiet, something unspoken passed between us, recognition maybe. Two souls weathered by shame, finding in each other the shape of something softer. But the world outside didn't soften with us. Word travels faster than wind in a small town, and folks have long memories for sin. One morning, Mrs. Dilly arrived at the porch, her shawl wrapped tight against the cold. She carried a sack of flour, holding it out like an accusation rather than a gift. "Figured you could use this," she said, eyes sharp, flicking over my belly. "Some say he stole you," she added, voice pitched so the trees might hear. "Others say you ran to him. Doesn't much matter, does it? A bastard's still a bastard." Her words scraped across my skin, but I kept my hands steady. "Maybe peace don't come from where you start," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "Maybe it comes from where you're finally allowed to stay." For a heartbeat, she flinched, eyes narrowing like a door half shut. "Town forgets slow," she muttered, "but it never forgets fully." Then she turned, the flour sack swinging at her side like a weight she'd rather I carry. I stood at the doorway long after she left, hand on the frame, breathing through the ache in my chest. Outside he chopped wood, each swing measured, each breath a cloud in the cold air. He didn't look over, didn't ask what was said. Didn't need to. Some things you carry together without words. That night I brought his supper to the porch instead of leaving it on the table. He was sitting there, hat low over his brow, firelight flickering in his eyes. I placed the bowl in his hands, the steam curling between us. "You never asked me anything," I said, voice low. "Figure you'll tell it when you want it told," he answered. Simple as stating the weather. "What if I never do?" I asked. "Still your story," he said, and sipped his stew. The quiet stretched out, comfortable as an old blanket. "Finally," I whispered, "the baby's father promised to marry me, then ran. My father said it was my fault, said no decent man would want a woman shamed." He nodded, slow, like he'd known men like that. "Sounds like your father prefers blame to reflection." A faint smile tugged at my mouth. He prefers noise to silence, I said. And for the first time in months, I felt something like laughter stirring in my chest. It didn't come out, but it warmed me all the same. Child have a name yet? He asked. I hesitated. No, I said, but I've been thinking maybe Mercy. His eyes met mine, and he nodded once. Fitting, he said. In that small word, I heard more kindness than all the prayers I'd whispered in empty chapels. And for a moment, the bruise on my cheek, the fear in my ribs, the whispers in town, they all felt smaller, like shadows at dawn. But even then, I knew peace in a place like this doesn't come without a fight, and the world doesn't let broken women stay mended for long. I thought the hardest part would be the bruises fading, but it wasn't. Bruises, I learned, are honest. They show what happened. It's the wounds you can't see, the ones stitched into your thoughts, that stay sore the longest. Each morning, I'd wake in Jed's cabin to the hush of pine branches brushing against the roof, the scent of wood smoke still hanging in the air, and for a few slow, precious heartbeats, I wouldn't remember what had driven me here. Then I'd roll over, feel the weight of my belly, and the memory would come back sharp as a blade's edge. Yet somehow, in that remembering, there was less terror each day. The past still followed me, but its footsteps grew quieter. The days settled into a rhythm that felt almost like breathing again. I'd sweep the floor, the bristles scratching across the old planks, watch the dust swirl in the morning light that spilled through the window. I'd boil water, my reflection rippling in the kettle, and fold Jed's shirts with care I never thought I'd give another soul. Each crease felt like an offering, a promise that I hadn't stopped trying to be gentle, even if the world hadn't been gentle with me. Jed never said much. He'd mend the fence out back, haul wood from the shed, and sometimes leave before dawn to check traps deeper in the woods. But even in his quiet, I felt something I couldn't name back then. Not pity, not duty, just presence. The way his shadow stretched across the doorway at dusk, the sound of his boots on the porch proof that someone stayed. One morning, while I was pouring tea, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. Hair longer than it had ever been, face thinner, but eyes somehow less hollow than before. The bruise on my cheek had yellowed at the edges. I touched it lightly, tracing its shape, and for the first time I didn't see shame. I saw survival. The bruise wasn't what defined me anymore, it was what I'd walked through. Spring tried to come early that year. Snow melted along the creek beds, and the wind smelled less like iron and more like wet earth. On one of those mornings, Jed surprised me. I was sitting in the rocking chair, one hand on my belly, humming a tune I barely remembered from childhood. He stepped inside, carrying something wrapped in burlap. He set it on the table, awkwardly scratching at the stubble on his chin. Figured you might want this, he muttered. I opened the cloth and found a small wooden cradle, rough but sturdy, the edges sanded smooth. My throat closed up so tight it hurt to swallow. No one had ever given me something for the baby. No one had ever thought of it as something worth building for. It's beautiful, I whispered. My voice cracked around the word, but I didn't care. He only nodded, like it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. Later that night, when the fire burned low and shadows danced along the walls, I ran my hand along the cradle's edge, feeling the small imperfections left by his knife. And for the first time since leaving town, I let myself imagine what it would be like to lay my baby down somewhere safe, somewhere built by hands that never struck, only shaped and steadied. But even as hope stirred in me, fear coiled tighter, because hope makes you visible, and in a town like ours, being seen could be as dangerous as being forgotten. Rumors, I learned, had legs faster than any horse. One morning I went to fetch water from the well. As I leaned over the worn stones, I caught sight of two figures at the tree line, men from town. Their voices carried on the breeze. They say she's living up there like a wife. One spat. Carrying the devil's seed, the other added. Their laughter cracked through the stillness, loud enough to make the crows scatter from the pines. My hand tightened on the bucket rope, knuckles white. For a heartbeat, shame surged back, hot and familiar. But then something colder, steadier settled over Minja, born not of violence, but of weariness. When I returned to the cabin, Jed was repairing a saddle strap by the doorway. He glanced up, eyes flicking over my face. "Hurt him?" he asked, voice calm as ever. "Yes," he admitted. "Don't let 'em set roots in you," he said. "They only bloom if you water 'em." Simple words, but they stayed with me long after. At night, I'd lie awake, the baby shifting under my hand, and repeat them like a prayer. They only bloom if you water 'em. One night, a storm rolled through. Thunder growled low across the valley, and rain drummed steady on the roof. I sat by the window watching the lightning flash across the ridge. Jed stepped up beside me, so close I could feel the warmth radiating from him, though he didn't touch me. "You scared?" he asked. "Not of the storm," I said softly. He nodded, as if that made perfect sense. "Me neither," he replied. I turned to him then, the lamplight catching the lines around his eyes, the scar that traced along his jaw. "What are you scared of?" I asked, voice barely a whisper. He looked out into the rain. "Of leaving something behind unfinished," he said after a moment. "Of silence that should have been broken." The words felt heavy, soaked in history I hadn't been invited to yet, but I didn't press. Some stories come when they're ready, not when they're asked for. The baby kicked hard then, enough to make me gasp. Jed's gaze dropped to my belly, and for the first time his hand hovered close. He didn't touch, but the space between his hand and my skin felt charged, like the quiet before lightning strikes. "He's strong," he murmured. I corrected, surprising even myself. I hope." He almost smiled. "She'll need to be." And standing there, side by side in the flickering light, I let myself imagine it. My daughter with dark hair tangled by the wind, running barefoot among the pines, laughter unburdened by shame. For a heartbeat, that dream felt possible. But the world beyond those cabin walls had a long memory. And sometimes the past doesn't knock, it kicks the door down. I remember the morning it began to change, not with shouting or fists, but with the uneasy silence that creeps in before a storm. It was late spring then, and the forest smelled of wet bark and thawed earth. Birds called out from high branches, and somewhere deeper, water moved slow and steady over stone. Jed had left before dawn, heading east to check the snares. He told me he'd be back before midday, and I believed him. His word had become something solid to me, like the beam that held our roof steady through the wind. Alone in the cabin, I moved slow, belly heavy now and feet aching more each day. I swept the hearth, folded the quilt at the foot of the bed, and paused to trace my fingers over the small wooden cradle. Each groove, each mark left by Jed's knife felt like a promise carved into wood. Here, a child will rest. Here, the world will be softer. But peace never stays long where men remember shame. I heard the sound first hoofbeats on wet earth, slow and deliberate. Then voices, low and mean-edged, drifting through the pines like smoke. My heart climbed into my throat, beating so hard I could taste it. Through the window I saw them, 3 figures on horseback, moving like they owned every road that led to this cabin. At the front rode my father, Eldon, his shoulders hunched as though the very bones in his back had grown bitter with age. Behind him, 2 men from town faces I recognized, though their names felt far away, as if they belonged to another life. They stopped near the fence. Eldon dismounted first, boots sinking into mud. He didn't bother to look around, didn't call my name. Instead, he walked straight for the porch, each step slow, like a man savoring the moment before he breaks something fragile. I stood frozen in the doorway, my hand resting on the latch. The baby kicked once, sharp and sudden, reminding me I wasn't alone. Eldon stopped at the bottom stair, eyes scanning me from head to toe. His gaze landed on my belly, and his lip curled. "So this is where you've chosen to rot?" he rasped, voice roughened by years of anger swallowed and spat back out. "Hiding in a shack with a man who ain't your husband." I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. My voice felt buried under weeks of silence. He climbed the first step, then the next, until only the thin wood of the threshold separated us. "You think this place makes you clean?" he sneered. Think hiding makes that bastard child less a stain on this family? His words struck harder than his fists ever did. But this time, something inside me held steady. The cabin felt small but not empty. The walls remembered kindness. The rocking chair by the hearth, the cradle Jed had built, all whispered that what grew here was worth defending. "I'm not going back," I managed to say, my voice rough but rooted. Eldon's eyes darkened, as if the idea of my refusal insulted him more than any curse. "You don't get to decide," he growled. "You're my blood. You'll come home, clean yourself of this sin, or I'll drag you by your hair." Behind him, the two men shifted, uncertain. They weren't blind. They saw the bruise still faint on my cheek, the swell of my belly. But men like them didn't stop men like him. They only followed, so long as the blame stayed safely pointed elsewhere. My hand tightened around the doorframe, nails digging into old wood. "This is my home now," I said. "You have no place here." A vein pulsed in Eldon's temple. His hands curled into fists, the leather of his gloves creaking. "You think that bastard out there cares for you? He's using you, same as any man would. And when he's done, you'll have nothing. He hasn't asked for anything." I shot back, louder than I meant. "He gave without asking. You wouldn't understand that." His face twisted, rage and disbelief tangling in his eyes. For a moment, he looked less like my father and more like a man cornered by something he couldn't name. Then he spat at my feet. "Fine," he hissed. "Rot here. But when the time comes, don't come crawling home, girl. You won't be welcome." He turned, boots grinding the porch boards, and mounted his horse. The two men glanced at me once, eyes caught between pity and cowardice, then followed him. The sound of hooves faded into the trees, leaving behind only the pounding of my heart. My knees gave out. I sank onto the rocker, one hand wrapped around my belly, the other pressed against my mouth to hold back the sob that wanted to tear free. The baby moved again, slower this time. I whispered, barely audible, "I won't let him touch you, I won't." When Jed returned near dusk, mud on his boots and shoulders wet from mist, he found me still in the rocker. His gaze swept the yard, then the porch, then me. "They came," he said, not as a question. I nodded. He took off his hat, resting it on the table. For a while, neither of us spoke. The fire crackled, and outside the wind shifted through the pines. "You still mean to stay?" he asked. "Yes," I whispered. "I'm tired of running." A shadow crossed his eyes. Not disappointment, fear, perhaps. "They won't stop," he warned. "I know," I said. My hand traced the curve of my belly. "But neither will I." Jed looked at me then, not at the bruise, not at the fear still lingering in my shoulders, but at the resolve that had grown quietly beneath it all. His gaze was steady, unflinching. "All right then," he murmured. "We stay." In that simple vow, there was no promise of safety, only of standing together when the world came knocking. That night, the rain returned, soft at first, then drumming steady on the roof. I lay awake, listening to its rhythm, counting each beat like a prayer. Outside, Jed moved about the porch, checking the latch on the gate, stacking wood near the door, not preparing to flee, preparing to withstand. As I drifted toward sleep, a thought settled into me, warm despite the fear. Maybe strength isn't loud. Maybe it's a quiet thing, built from small choices. A cradle carved by calloused hands. A porch light left burning through the night. A woman who decides once and for all not to kneel. And though the road ahead felt sharp with thorns, for the first time, I believed we could walk it together. After that day, the air around the cabin changed. It wasn't that Eldon's words haunted me more than his fists ever had. It was the way they stayed, floating through the pines like a sickness you couldn't see but felt with every breath. At night, even when the fire burned bright and Jed's steady movements calmed my thoughts, a question would slip through the cracks of my resolve. What if he came back? And worse, what if this time he didn't come alone? Yet morning still arrived, soft and stubborn. The sun found its way through the branches, laying pale stripes across the floorboards, And each dawn, I chose to rise. Not because I was fearless, but because I refused to let fear decide for me. I began to notice small changes in myself, as if each day in that cabin peeled away layers of something old and bitter. My shoulders, once curved inward from years of trying to look smaller, started to square. My hands, once only meant for mending and scrubbing, learned steadiness in other ways. Splitting kindling for the stove, patching the fence where the boards had rotted, even carrying buckets of water from the creek without stopping to catch my breath halfway. Jed watched, not with pride or pity, but with quiet acceptance, as though he'd always known this was who I could be. Sometimes I'd catch his gaze lingering not on my belly or the bruise, long since faded, but on the way I moved, like a woman remembering how to take up space. It was early one morning when he handed me something unexpected, a small, old revolver, its handle worn smooth by another's grip. "Best you know how," he said, his voice calm as river stones. He didn't offer to teach right away, didn't crowd me. He simply placed it in my hands and stepped back. At first, the weight of it scared me. The barrel pointed at nothing but the open sky, yet it felt as though it aimed at every fear I'd carried since childhood. But after a while, my fingers grew familiar with its cold honesty. Steel doesn't lie, and neither does the threat of it. Later that day, Jed set up empty bottles along the fence posts. We stood side by side, the grass wet beneath our boots. He spoke little, only enough to show me where to place my thumb, how to steady my breath before squeezing the trigger. When the first shot cracked through the morning air, birds scattered into the pines, and my ears rang with the echo. I missed wide. My hands shook. Jed didn't scold. He simply nodded once and said, "Again." By the sixth shot, my aim was no truer, but my grip had steadied, and for now that felt like enough. In the evenings, after the sun sank behind the ridge and the shadows grew long, we settled into a quiet routine. Jed would pour 2 mugs of coffee, steam curling into the hush of the room while I rested by the hearth, one hand on my belly, feeling the slow, turning movements of the life inside me. Sometimes, without thinking, I'd speak to her, words barely above a whisper. I'd tell her about the creek that ran clear even after the rains, about the smell of fresh-cut pine, about the warmth of the sun on my face. Simple things, real things, the kind of truths I hoped she'd know instead of the lies I'd been raised on. One night, Jed listened longer than usual. The firelight caught the edge of his jaw, and for the first time, I saw something behind his silence, and not just patience, but grief, like a man who had once hoped for a life different from the one he'd lived. I didn't ask then, but I filed it away, the way you keep a stone in your pocket to remember the weight of it. Then the letters began, folded sheets left on the fence post, written in my father's hand. Each one spoke the same poison. "You shame us. You belong to us. Come home before worse finds you." The words weren't what hurt most, it was the familiarity of them, the memory of how quickly guilt could bloom under my ribs. For years, I'd mistaken guilt for duty. Now, standing on that porch, with the letters trembling in my hand, I saw them for what they were, chains, rusted and worn, but chains all the same. Jed burned the letters each night, without reading them aloud. He didn't ask what they said, he didn't need to. The smoke that curled into the dark sky carried enough truth. One evening, as the last page turned to ash, I said almost to myself, "He won't stop." Jed's answer was quiet, certain. "Then neither will we." Something in me settled at those words, not peace, exactly, but resolve, the kind that feels like iron setting in your bones. Spring crept closer, and with it the baby's arrival. My steps slowed, breath shorter, but my will grew stubborn. I sewed small clothes from scraps of linen, stitched every seam twice to hold against the roughness of this life. Each piece felt like defiance, a proof that love could build something new, even from broken beginnings. One morning, as I folded the tiny shirts, Jed spoke from the doorway. "You've got a name yet?" he asked, voice softer than the question sounded. I paused, cloth still in my hands. "Mercy," I said. I think, Mercy, he nodded, eyes fixed on me in that steady way of his. Good name, he murmured. Strong, too. Hearing it spoken aloud made it real. Mercy, not born of shame or fear but of choice. But the world outside didn't sleep as easily as we did. Word spread in the town that Eldon was gathering more than letters. Men whose faces I remembered from church pews. Men who once averted their eyes when my father raised his hand. No, they gathered in quiet corners, voices low, anger feeding on itself like fire left untended. Rumor reached us one evening, carried by a trader passing through. He means to come get you himself, the man warned, shifting from foot to foot as he spoke. Says you belong at home, for the baby shames the family name further. Home. The word tasted like ashes in my mouth. That night, as the moon hung low over the ridge, I lay awake beside the window. My reflection stared back at me's darker, skin paler, but steadier somehow. I rested my hand on the curve of my belly and whispered to the child within, They may come, but we won't kneel, not this time. Outside, the pines stirred under the wind's breath, branches swaying like 1,000 silent witnesses, and for the first time I didn't feel alone in that promise. The days that followed felt heavy, as if each hour carried twice its weight. Even the light seemed different, paler, more watchful. Dawn came slower, dusk settled earlier, and every rustle beyond the tree line made my heart stumble. Jed never said the word siege, but I saw it in the way he moved, stacking extra firewood beneath the porch, hammering fresh nails into the shutters, checking the rifle at dawn and again before nightfall. He did these things quietly, as though not to frighten Mebute. Fear already sat with me, uninvited, every hour of every day. And yet, alongside that fear, something else had begun to grow. It wasn't courage in the heroic sense, and not the kind that rides out to meet the enemy on open ground, but a quieter, harder thing. The courage to remain even when every instinct screamed to flee. The courage to choose love over shame, even knowing the cost. In the evenings, I would stand by the window, hand resting on my belly, watching Jed in the yard. The way he tested each plank of the fence, how he paused now and then to scan the trees. He never rushed. Each movement spoke of a man who had learned, somewhere along the broken road of his past, that preparation is not born of panic but of patience. And while he guarded the cabin's walls, I learned to guard something else, the soft place in me where hope had started to take root. The letters stopped coming. For a moment, I dared to think maybe Eldon had finally let go. But silence, I'd learned, is not always mercy. Sometimes it is the breath the storm takes before tearing the roof from your life. The truth arrived in whispers. A boy from town, no more than 14, brought word one gray afternoon. His boots were muddy, hair damp with sweat and rain. He stood on the porch, shifting from foot to foot, voice cracking as he spoke. "They're coming, miss," he said, eyes darting toward the trees. "Your pa's gathered near a dozen men. Says you'll come home tonight, willing or not." The words felt cold against my chest. Not tomorrow, not someday, tonight. Jed's hand rested on my shoulder, steadying me, and the boy fled back into the woods, fear quickening his steps. We stood there for a moment, Jed and I, without speaking. The pines around us swayed under a slow wind, whispering secrets neither of us wanted to hear. At last, Jed spoke. "You still mean to stay?" My answer came from somewhere deep, below the bruises and the years of kneeling. "Yes," I said, "even if I'm afraid." His gaze held mine. "Fear's on us," he murmured. "A woman can be afraid and still refuse to yield." In that moment, it wasn't comfort I felt, but recognition. He saw me not as someone to be protected, but as someone willing to stand beside him, equal even in fear. As dusk fell, the cabin grew small, under the gathering dark. Jed brought the rifle from its place above the hearth and set it near the door. "Only lift it if you must," he told me, voice low. "Only point it if your mind's decided." I nodded, the weight of that promise heavy in my chest. Together, we barred the shutters and bolted the door. The baby moved inside me, restless, as if sensing the tension that thickened the air. I lit the lantern, its flame trembling. Shadows danced across the walls, and for a moment, the room felt less like a home and more like a fortress of wood and will. Outside, the sound of hooves began slow at first, then gathering into a dull thunder that shook the floorboards. My breath caught. Every hoofbeat felt like a drum, calling back every memory of submission, of lowering my head to my father's rage. But tonight, I kept my chin lifted. Jed stepped to the window, peering through a narrow crack. "They've stopped by the fence," he said, voice tight but calm. I moved to stand beside him, hand resting over the curve of my belly. From where we stood, I could see shapes in the dark. Men on horseback, lanterns casting long, swaying shadows. And at their center, my father. Even at a distance, I saw the iron in his posture, the certainty of a man who had never learned to question his own right to claim what he called his. They waited. Long minutes stretched until the silence became unbearable. Then Eldon spoke, his voice carrying through the stillness, rough as gravel. "Bonnie May, you come out here now. This ain't no place for a woman, least of all one about to shame herself further." My heart pounded so loud I feared he might hear it. Jed's hand found mine, his palm rough but warm. His eyes met mine in the half-light, and without speaking he reminded me of every choice that had led us to this moment. Outside, Eldon spoke again. "Don't make this worse. Don't make me do what I'd rather not." I swallowed. "And what would that be?" I whispered, though he couldn't hear. I knew my father, knew the brittle anger that lived just beneath his words. He would not leave empty-handed, not without trying to break what he couldn't bend. Jed straightened, shoulders set. "Stay inside," he told me, but my feet wouldn't obey. "No," I said, softer than a breath but firm. "Not this time." Together, we stepped onto the porch. The air smelled of wet earth and pine sap, the night cool against my face. Eldon's gaze found me at once, sharp as a hawk's. "Look at you," he spat, parading yourself beside him like you're something worth claiming. My hand pressed over my belly, the baby moving beneath. "I'm not yours to claim," I said. My voice shook, but it didn't break. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, quickly replaced by fury. "You forget your place, girl." "I remember it too well," I answered. "That's why I won't return to it." One of the men beside him shifted, eyes dropping. Not all hearts of stone, I thought. Eldon leaned forward in the saddle. "This man beside you, he'll tire of you. What then? You'll come crawling home, belly empty, spirit broke." "He's never asked me to crawl," I said. "That's yours alone to demand." For the first time, Jed spoke, his voice low but carrying. "She stays, and you'll leave." Eldon's gaze burned toward him, hatred deepening the lines of his face. "You've taken what's mine," he growled. Jed didn't flinch. "She was never yours," he said. "And she's not mine either. She's hers." Those words settled into me, weighty and bright, like a key turned in a long locked door. The men behind Eldon looked uneasy now. The silence between us stretched until it felt like the whole night held its breath. At last, Eldon spat on the ground. "You'll regret this, girl," he said, voice thick with promise. "Blood don't forget." He turned his horse, and the others followed, the lanterns swaying away into the trees until the night swallowed them whole. Only then did my knees weaken. Jed caught me, steady as always. My breath came hard, tears pricking my eyes, but they did not fall. "I thought I'd tremble more," I whispered. "You're stronger than you know," he answered, his hand warm against my back. That night, the baby moved again, a slow, steady turning. I lay awake long after Jed had gone to the porch, listening to the wind move through the pines. And for the first time I believed the child inside me would be born into something different. Not peace, perhaps, but dignity. And that, I had learned, was worth more than all my father's rage. Outside, the wind carried the last echoes of hoofbeats away. And in their place, quiet returned, not as surrender but as claim. The morning after Eldon turned away, the world felt strangely quiet, as if even the wind had paused to see what we'd do next. I woke before dawn, lying still in the gray hush, my breath fogging in the chill air. The baby shifted low and heavy, a reminder that time was moving whether I was ready or not. I pushed myself upright, hands pressed against the mattress, every muscle stiff from standing so long the night before. For a moment I sat there just breathing, my palms resting on the round of my belly. I thought of how far I had come from a woman who flinched at every footstep to someone who had spoken her own defiance under moonlight. Outside, the first light touched the pines, turning the frost to pale fire. I rose, wrapping Jed's spare coat around my shoulders, and stepped onto the porch. The boards felt cold under my feet, but I stood there anyway, facing the empty clearing where Eldon's men had waited. The ground showed their passing, hoofprints pressed deep into the mud, broken twigs where they had turned away. But they were gone, and the air that filled my lungs tasted of freedom, even if it still carried the memory of fear. Jed was already in the yard, stacking wood, the steady rhythm of his movements calming the ache in my chest. He glanced up, his gaze meeting mine, and nodded unseen words needed. We had faced something dark and had not bent. In the days that followed, the cabin felt both smaller and stronger. I moved through its rooms with new resolve, sweeping the hearth, stirring stew over the fire, mending clothes by the light of a single oil lamp. Each task, once done in guilt or habit, now felt chosen a mark of belonging, not punishment. The baby grew restless, turning often under my ribs. Sometimes the movement made me pause, one hand pressed over the quick, fluttering life inside me. I spoke to her softly, words I'd never dared say aloud before. You will come into a world that tried to deny you, but you will not be denied. At night, Jed sat on the porch, watching the trees until the moon rose high. I would watch him through the window, the lamplight catching the edges of his face, and wonder what ghosts stood beside him in the dark. He spoke of them rarely, but his silence told me enough. Some losses can't be buried under soil or years. Yet in the quiet, a strange peace had settled between us, not the peace of forgetting pain, but the kind that grows from knowing someone else carries hurt and still chooses gentleness. One evening, as I folded the last of the baby's clothes, a knock echoed against the door, soft, hesitant. My heart leapt into my throat. Jed moved first, crossing the room in 3 steps, the rifle at his side. He opened the door just wide enough to see. Standing there was a woman I recognized even before the lamplight reached her face. Mrs. Dilly. Her shawl was pulled tight around her shoulders, her breath misting in the cold air. I came to talk, she said, her voice low, almost ashamed. Jed glanced back at me. I nodded once. She stepped inside, her eyes flicking around the cabin, landing briefly on my belly before darting away. I won't stay long, she began. Word in town is your father's stirring up trouble again. Talking louder, gathering those who listen. I swallowed, the taste of dread bitter on my tongue. He won't let go, I whispered. No, she agreed, her gaze steady now. But you should know not everyone in town agrees with him. Some remember you before all this. Some see how he truly is. Her words didn't erase the fear, but they lit a small spark of hope in the ashes. Thank you, I managed. She hesitated at the door. A child born from sorrow can still bring joy, she said, almost to herself. Then she left, the door closing softly behind her. After she was gone, Jed spoke for the first time in hours. You've still got friends, even where you thought you had none. Not friends, I said, my voice quiet but firm, but maybe not enemies. He nodded, accepting that truth. It might be enough. The next morning, the sky was low and heavy, promising rain. My back ached, and each step felt weighted. Jed watched me move about the cabin, concern hidden in the lines around his eyes. You should rest, he urged. I can't, I answered, voice sharper than I meant. If I sit, I'll only listen for hooves I can't hear yet. He understood, saying nothing more. Instead, he worked beside me, chopping wood, mending the fence, even kneading dough for the bread I could not finish. Watching his hands, large and scarred, turn simple flour into something warm and living reminded me why I had chosen to stay, not for protection, but for partnership. That night, the wind rose, rattling the shutters. I lay awake, one hand over my belly, feeling the baby shift and turn. Each movement felt like a promise that life would not be denied, no matter how dark the world outside. In the small hours, I rose, crossing to the shelf where the faded baby blanket lay folded. My fingers traced the stitched letters, S.J. Jed had never spoken of it, but as I stood there, I understood. It was for a child lost, a wound older than my scars. For a moment I wanted to wake him, to ask whose name those letters marked, but I did not. Some grief belongs to silence, not words. The days grew shorter, the air colder. Each morning a thin crust of frost rimed the pines. My belly felt heavier, the baby's kick stronger, more insistent. At times pain would seize my back, sharp enough to steal my breath, then fade as quickly as it came. Jed saw, though I tried to hide it. One evening, he set his hand gently against my arm. "It's close," he said. I nodded. Fear and hope tangled tight in my chest. "Whatever happens," he continued, "you won't face it alone." His words sank deeper than bone. For the first time in my life, I believed them. One night, as we shared coffee by the hearth, I spoke of my fear. "What if he returns, Jed? What if he breaks what we've built?" His answer was quiet, but sure. "Then we rebuild. And if he tears it down again, we build still. He can't take what's in you." "And what is that?" I whispered. "Will," he said, "and mercy." Tears rose, but I blinked them away. "She'll have your quiet strength," I murmured. "No," he said, "she'll have your fire." That night, I dreamed of fire and wind, of hooves pounding dark roads, and of a child born under a sky lit by lightning. I woke breathless, the baby moving inside me like a restless tide. Outside, dawn broke cold and pale, and the pines whispered secrets I could almost understand. The world was not safe, but it was mine now, ours. And as my breath steadied, I whispered into the quiet cabin, a vow made not of fear, but of choice. "We will not kneel again." The days folded into each other like brittle pages, each dawn breaking colder than the last. The pines outside stood silent and tall, but the wind that whispered through them brought an unease I couldn't name. My belly had grown so heavy now that each breath felt borrowed. The baby kicked with an urgency that sometimes made me stop mid-sentence, my hand pressed against the swell, as if asking for patience just a little longer. Jed saw it too. His gaze lingered longer on me now when I rose from the chair, when I crossed the room to stir the stew, when I stepped out to fetch water from the well. He said little, but in the quiet between us, I felt the weight of what he feared, that the child's coming might bring pain neither of us could fend off. The cold seeped into the walls of the cabin, frosting the windows at dawn. I laid extra wood by the hearth each night, listening to the logs crackle as the flames curled around them. In those moments, warmth felt like a fragile victory, one I dared not take for granted. At night, Jed still took to the porch, his silhouette dark against the moonlit clearing. Sometimes, when sleep refused me, I watched him through the glass, wondering what haunted him so deeply it could only be faced under stars. The stitched letters S.J. waited quietly on the shelf, a ghost neither of us spoke aloud. Word from town trickled in like cold rain. Mrs. Dilly returned one afternoon, the wind catching her shawl as she stepped onto the porch. Her eyes flickered toward my belly, then quickly away. "He hasn't let it go," she said, voice lowered, as if the trees themselves might carry word back to Eldon. "He talks louder now, says you're bewitched, that the child will bring ruin." I swallowed, the words dry in my mouth. "And the town?" I asked. "Some listen," she admitted, "but some remember how he raised his hand before he raised his voice. They don't say it out loud, but they see." Her honesty cut both Wayshope and dread, twisted together like twine. I thanked her, voice thin, and she left, boots crunching over the frost-hardened earth. Inside, Jed waited, his hands blackened from splitting wood. "They'll come again," I told him. He nodded, jaw tightening. "Then let them come." It wasn't a promise of safety, only of standing, and somehow that felt stronger than any vow of victory. As the days shortened, my body grew restless. Sleep slipped away in fragments, replaced by dreams that tangled memory and fear. I dreamed of Eldon's voice calling through the pines, of lanterns bobbing like hungry eyes beyond the fence, of the baby in my arms crying for breath that would not come. I'd wake breathless, the baby turning under my ribs, and sit by the hearth until the flames blurred. In those hours, the cabin felt both sanctuary and cage, a place I had chosen, yet one I feared might be broken open by force. Jed would wake sometimes too, though neither of us spoke. He'd add another log to the fire, then sit beside me, his silence a kind of keeping watch. One evening, as the last light died in the trees, a sharp pain knifed through my belly. I gasped, gripping the table's edge until my knuckles whitened. Jed turned at once, eyes narrowing with worry. "It's nothing," I lied, though the truth burned hot under my breath. The pain passed, but it left a tremor in my limbs, a warning more than a threat. The baby's time was drawing near. That night, the wind rose fierce enough to rattle the shutters. I lay awake, listening to the storm's voice twist through the pines. Each gust sounded like footfalls, each creak of the boards like a door pushed open. And beneath it all, the memory of Eldon's voice, sharp as a whip. "Blood don't forget." I pressed my hand over the baby, whispering soft words I wasn't sure she could hear. "You are not a shame," I murmured into the dark. "You are not his to name." Morning dawned gray, the sky heavy with snow not yet fallen. My back ached, and each breath felt tighter in my chest. Jed saw it, though he did not speak. Instead, he built the fire higher and drew water from the well, setting the pot to boil over the flames. "Just in case," he said quietly. I wanted to tell him I wasn't afraid of the pain to come, but that would have been a lie. Pain I had known, but this was different. This was a pain that might take me from her before I could even hold her. And that thought clawed deeper than any wound my father had ever left on my skin. The town's silence grew louder. No new visits, no letters, only the hush of something gathering strength beyond our sight. Sometimes, when I stepped onto the porch, I imagined I could feel eyes in the tree line watching, waiting. One night, Jed came in from the porch, his coat dusted white with frost. "Tracks," he said, voice low. "Horsemen, maybe 2 or 3. Didn't come close, but they were there." My chest tightened. "Scouts?" I asked. "Maybe," he answered, "or men too curious to mind their business." Neither comforted me. We spoke little after that, our words saved for necessity. But the quiet between us was not empty, it held worry, yes, but also resolve. One morning, as I washed by the window, I caught my reflection. Hair loose around my shoulders, face drawn with fatigue, belly full and low. I barely recognized her, the woman who had once knelt in the dirt, her cheek burning under her father's hand. Yet as I looked, I saw something else too, a chin held higher, a gaze no longer dropped to the ground. I traced the curve of my belly with my palm, feeling the baby kick beneath, and whispered, "We made it this far." The pains grew sharper as the moon waned, coming sudden and strong enough to steal my breath, then easing back into a dull ache. Each time, Jed's eyes followed me, waiting, though he never asked. One night, a pain bent me double beside the hearth. I clutched the chair's back until it passed, sweat cold on my brow. Jed stepped forward, voice tight. "It's time?" "Not yet," I panted. "But soon." His jaw worked, unspoken worry deepening the lines around his mouth. And then, the moment I had feared, yet knew must come, at dusk with snow falling soft outside, another knock came at the door. This one wasn't hesitant. Jed took the rifle in hand, nodding for me to step back. Through the sliver of open door, a familiar voice spilled inside bitter as old vinegar. "Bonnie May," Eldon called, words slow and measured. "Come out here. We've things to settle before the night takes hold." I felt the baby turn inside me, as if to hide from the voice that had haunted both our lives. Jed spoke, low but firm. "She's not coming out, leave." But Eldon laughed, "Fida," sound that scraped bone. "Do you think walls can keep blood from blood? Do you think that child makes her yours?" I stepped forward, hand braced on the doorframe, breath shaking but voice steady. "She's not yours either," I called, "and neither am I." For a heartbeat, silence swallowed the clearing. Then Eldon's voice came colder, more brittle. "Then you've chosen your grave, girl." Behind him, shadows shifted, shapes of men, silent, waiting. I felt fear grip my throat, but beneath it, something fiercer rose. The knowledge that my life, my child, were mine to keep or lose on my own terms. Jed stood beside me, rifle steady. Outside, snow whispered against the roof, soft and relentless. The night had come, and so had the reckoning. Snow fell steady, softening the edges of the world beyond the door. Inside, the cabin's warmth felt fragile-thin walls and firelight between us and the cold malice gathered outside. My breath clouded in the air. My hand pressed low against the ache in my belly that had turned sharp and insistent. The baby was coming. Not tomorrow, not soon, now. Jed felt it too. I saw it in the flicker of his eyes as he glanced at me, the question unspoken. I gave a small nod. There was no stopping what had already begun. Beyond the door, Eldon's voice carried through the falling snow. "You come out now, girl," he drawled, "or I'll burn that shack to cinders and take you from the ashes." My chest tightened around a surge of rage so clean it burned away fear. Once, his threats would have buckled my knees. Once, I would have believed the only way to survive was to submit. But now, with life quickening inside me, I knew surrender would not save us. Only standing our ground might. Jed shifted his stance. The rifle braced against his shoulder. Outside, boots crunched in the snow too, 3 men moving closer. Eldon's breath steamed in the dusk, the fire of his hate warming him where mercy never could. Pain tightened around my spine, dropping me to a knee. My hand caught the table's edge, breath coming sharp and ragged. Jed turned, voice low. "It's starting?" "Yes," I gasped. "She's coming." His jaw worked once. Then he stepped forward, pushing the door open wider so Eldon could see his face. "You leave," Jed said, each word heavy as a hammer. "She stays. The child stays." Eldon laughed, the sound thin and cruel in the cold air. "That child is mine to name or cast out. And you think one rifle keeps back blood?" Behind Eldon, the other men shifted, eyes flicking between him and Jed, and then to me. They saw my belly, the sweat starting to bead at my temples, the hand pressed to my side. One man, a younger hand I didn't know, looked uneasy, his grip on the rifle slackening. "You can't keep her," Eldon hissed. "She's my blood, my shame to control." Jed didn't raise his voice. "Not anymore," he said. The simplicity of it cut sharper than any shout. Pain roared through me then, white-hot and relentless. My vision tunneled, the cabin's edges blurring. I heard myself moan low and broken, the baby twisted inside, impatient to enter a world that hadn't yet welcomed her. I forced my eyes open, locking on Eldon's face through the door. "You will not touch her," I rasped, voice hoarse with pain and fury both. Eldon's mouth twisted. "You think that man makes you clean? That birth redeems your sin?" I braced a hand against the wall, dragging myself upright. "No," I spat, "but it makes me more than your shame." For a moment, silence pooled in the snow-heavy dusk. Even the wind seemed to hush, waiting to see what would break first, my body or my resolve. The young man behind Eldon spoke, voice uncertain. "Maybe we ought to leave it, Eldon. She's near her time." Eldon whirled on him, hate raw in his eyes. "Shut your mouth, boy. You'll do as I say." Jed took a step forward then, rifle lowered but ready. "Go home," he said to the others, "before this ends worse than you came for." The men hesitated, caught in the pull between a tyrant's rage and a quiet man's conviction. The younger one backed a step, then another, boots sinking into fresh snow. Eldon's gaze snapped to me, and in it I saw the truth, naked and ugly. It had never been about saving me. It had always been about owning me. Even if I died in the taking, another pain gripped me, harder than the last, and I sank to my knees, breath tearing free in a ragged cry. Warmth spread down my thighs. My waters had broken. The baby was coming now, whether the world outside would allow it or not. Jed turned, voice urgent but calm. Inside, he ordered the men. Or leave. But you won't stand between her and life. Eldon's face flushed with rage. You think you can take what's mine and call it mercy? Jed met his eyes, unblinking. It's not mercy, he said. It's choice, hers. My head spun, vision dancing with sparks of black. I felt the baby's weight shift lower, an unstoppable tide rolling through me. The room swam, the cold air cut against sweat-slick skin. I crawled to the hearth, gripping the stones, teeth clenched against the scream that rose in my throat. I won't die for him, I whispered, breathless, and she won't be born into his chains. Somewhere behind me, Jed's boots thudded on the boards. The door slammed shut, the bar dropped into place. Outside, Eldon roared, fists hammering against the wood. Open this door, he bellowed. Bonnie May, you come out here, or I'll bring that cabin down. Jed knelt beside me, voice low and steady. Look at me, he said. I raised my head, breath shuddering. You're not alone, he told me. Not anymore. His words anchored me in the swirl of pain and terror. I clung to them as the next contraction rolled through, ripping a raw cry from my chest. Breathe, he said. Hold to me. I did. My fingers curled into his sleeve, nails biting through cloth. Another wave crashed over me, hot and merciless. I can't, I gasped. You can, he countered, his voice iron. Because you must. Outside, I heard wood splinter. Eldon was trying to break through, rage blinding him to all else. But the cabin held, old beams and stubborn nails standing firm. My body heaved, the baby's head pressing low. Fire burned through my spine, fear mixing with an ancient primal will. I need to push, I rasped. Jed nodded, pressing a cloth to my brow. Then push, he urged. Bring her here. With a cry that split the quiet, I bore down, the world narrowing to pain and breath, and the life caught between. My bones felt as though they'd break. My heart roared in my chest. Through the haze, I heard Jed murmuring words I couldn't catch, but his voice wove through the agony. A rope I refused to let go of. Outside, the hammering grew louder, but so did the baby's coming. One more breath, one more push, and I felt her crown, the burn of new life forcing the past aside. Again, Jed urged, hands steady at my shoulder. I pushed, and the room exploded in white, the pain cresting and then breaking. A cry split the cabin's air, thin, new, alive. For a moment, everything froze. My breath, Eldon's roars, even the fire's hiss. Only her cry moved through the room, small, yet fierce. Jed caught her, wrapping her in the faded blue blanket. His hands, calloused and sure, trembling now with something close to awe. He placed her in my arms, and the weight of her was heavier than I'd dreamed, and lighter too, because it lifted something I hadn't known was still inside me. Outside, silence fell. Eldon's voice stopped. Perhaps he heard her cry. Perhaps even he knew some battles were lost, not by force, but by birth. Jed pressed a hand to my shoulder. She's here, he said softly. I looked down at her, face scrunched and pink, eyes squeezed shut against the world. My heart broke open, not with pain, but with something raw, love, fierce and unasked. You're mine, I whispered, voice shaking, and you are not a sin. Snow still fell, blanketing the clearing beyond the window. Eldon's shadow shifted in the trees, the fight gone quiet for now but not ended. Yet as I held her, breath slowing, I knew something true. The war for my life had ended the moment I chose to fight for hers. and whatever came next, we would face it together. The cabin had settled into a silence that was both fragile and full, the kind of quiet that hums beneath your skin after a storm. Outside, the snow lay thick and unbroken, softening the harsh edges of the world. Inside, my arms cradled the tiny weight of the child who had torn through my fear and pain, who had come to stitch the ragged pieces of my life back together. Her cries were faint now, more the soft stirrings of new life than the piercing wails of birth. I traced the curve of her cheek with a trembling finger, marveling at the way she fit so perfectly against my chest. Her tiny hands curled and uncurled like the first timid buds of spring. Jed sat nearby, the firelight casting a warm glow over his rough features, softened somehow by the way his eyes never left us. The weight of the past hung between us, still unspoken but real. His dog lay curled by the hearth, silent and watchful. It had been hours since Eldon's threats echoed into the night, and yet the fear lingered like smoke in the air. He had not come back yet, but I knew the shadows in his heart did not rest so easily. Days passed, and with them, a strange kind of peace began to seep into the cabin. I learned to breathe through the pain still lingering in my body, to trust in the strength that had carried me this far. The baby whom I had named Mercy grew quiet and strong, her presence a fierce anchor in a world that still felt tilted and uncertain. Jed helped in ways I had never expected, fetching water, stacking wood, and in moments when the ache was too much, simply sitting with us, offering a steady presence without words. The soft creak of his boots on the porch had become part of the rhythm of my days. Sometimes, when Mercy slept, Jed would stare into the fire, his face unreadable, a flicker of something old and raw crossing his eyes. I wanted to ask about the blue blanket stitched with those letters SJ, to unravel the mystery of his past, but the words caught in my throat. Outside the cabin, the world kept turning, and the whispers from town grew louder. Mrs. Dilly's visits became more frequent, her eyes sharper, her smiles less kind. "Some folks say the girl's got that man tamed," she remarked one afternoon, handing me a sack of flour with a weight beneath her words I could not ignore. "Others say she's cursed the whole place," Jed added quietly, leaning against the doorframe. His voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. I met their gazes, feeling the truth of both. The town was watching, waiting for cracks in our fragile fortress. One morning, I found the letter slipped under the door. The handwriting was crude but unmistakable. "You can't hide what's blood. We'll come for what's ours." My stomach twisted, a cold shiver trailing down my spine. I crushed the paper in my hand, swallowing the lump that threatened to rise. Jed saw my face and took the letter gently. "They're scared," he said, voice low, "but fear makes men dangerous." I nodded, my grip tightening on Mercy as she stirred in my arms. Night fell with a bitter chill, the kind that gnaws at your bones. Jed stood guard by the door, rifle in hand, eyes sharp in the firelight. Mercy slept peacefully, her soft breaths a lullaby against the wind's howl. The first knock came just past midnight sharp, insistent. My heart slammed against my ribs. "Who's there?" Jed's voice was steady, but his hand tightened on the rifle. "Friends," came a rough reply. "We just want to talk." Jed's eyes narrowed. "No one comes here but me." The knocking grew louder, a hammering echo in the still night. I clutched Mercy closer, whispering promises to her that I wasn't sure I believed yet. "You're safe here. I will protect you." The door shuddered under another blow. Jed raised his rifle. "Last warning." A silence fell, thick and heavy. Then the door splintered inward with a crash. Men poured into the cabin, 3, maybe 4, faces shadowed and hard. Eldon among them, his eyes wild and burning with a fury I had never seen before. The firelight danced over his twisted grin. Jed stepped forward, weapon ready, voice like steel. "You want to fight? You found one." They didn't answer, only charged. The cabin erupted in chaos. Wood splintered, curses flew, and the night filled with the sounds of struggle grunts, thuds, the crack of fists meeting flesh. I held Mercy tight, shoving her behind a chair, shielding her with my body, even as my mind screamed to run. Jed fought like a man who had already lost everything, his rifle swinging, fists flying, each move precise and desperate. Eldon's rage was unholy, his blows aimed to break and claim. The fight blurred into a nightmare of noise and pain. I heard Mercy cry, sharp and terrified, and my own scream tore from my throat. Then, through the chaos, came a sharp crack. Jed's rifle discharged. A man fell, clutching his shoulder, staggering back. The others hesitated. In the silence that followed, Eldon's face twisted with hatred and fear. "You think this changes anything?" he spat. "You'll never be free?" Jed's voice was calm but fierce. "Freedom isn't given, it's taken." The men retreated, dragging their wounded with them. As the dust settled, I sank to the floor, tears streaming down my face. Mercy nestled against my chest, her warmth a balm to the storm inside me. Jed knelt beside me, rough hands gentle. "We'll keep them away," he promised. I looked up, finding in his eyes a fierce vow that outshone the firelight. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the scars of the fight with a quiet grace. Inside, something deeper was healing our fragile, fierce life together. The past would not be forgotten, but it no longer held us captive. Together, we would forge a new path, one born from pain, yes, but tempered by the stubborn, unyielding strength of hope. The first light crept slowly through the cracked window panes, painting the cabin in soft gold. Outside, the world lay hushed under a thick blanket of snow, but inside, something far heavier had settled, a quiet resolve that wasn't born of ease but of trial. Mercy stirred in my arms, her small breath steady and sure, a fragile rhythm in the calm. I watched her face, peaceful now, unaware of the storm we had passed through, the battle that had shaped us both long before her first cry. Jed sat close, his eyes tracing the lines of my face, with a tenderness I never thought I'd see on a man so weathered by loss and silence. His hand found mine, rough fingers closing over mine with a promise that needed no words. For the first time since his journey began, I felt something beyond survival. I felt the fragile, flickering glow of hope. The past was not gone. It was etched into the grain of the wooden walls, in the scars across my body, in the cautious glances we still cast toward the door, but it no longer held dominion over us. The town's whispers faded, replaced by a cautious respect born not of kindness, but of understanding that Bonnie Mae was no longer a shadow to be scorned. I was a mother, a woman who had chosen her own fate and claimed it with fire and blood. Eldon never returned. I imagined the weight of his failure sank into him like a stone dragging down a man in a river. I didn't mourn his absence. I mourned the father I never had, the man who could have stood beside me instead of tearing me down. Jed, in his quiet way, became my anchor in this wild, unforgiving land. He never pushed, never asked for more than I could give. He offered steadiness, a rare gift to a soul battered by years of storms. The cabin grew warmer with life. Mercy's laughter, sound I never imagined I'd hear, filled the small space, chasing away shadows that had clung too tightly for too long. We built a life not of grand gestures but of daily acts. Firewood stacked, meals shared, quiet moments spent watching the sun set behind frost-kissed pines. One evening, as twilight draped its soft veil over the ridge, Jed pulled from his coat a small, worn box. Inside lay the simple gold band I had brought with me, the one that had belonged to my mother. With hands steady but gentle, he slipped the ring onto my finger. It was a quiet ceremony, no words, no fanfare, just two broken souls claiming something whole. But hope is a wary thing in a land carved from hardship. There were nights when the wind howled like the ghosts of those we'd left behind, and I'd wake to find Jed gone, standing alone in the clearing, face upturned to the indifferent stars. One night I followed him, the snow crunching beneath my boots. He didn't speak at first, just looked out into the vast, cold dark. "I carry ghosts," he said finally. "They don't rest easy." I reached for his hand, our fingers intertwining. "We carry them all," I whispered, "but they don't have to weigh us down." In that moment, Under the endless sky, we made a silent pact to face the past without letting it define us, to build a future forged, not from fear, but from choice. The seasons shifted, and with them, our strength grew. Mercy learned to walk on unsteady legs, her laughter ringing louder, her spirit fierce. She was a child born from pain but raised in love, a testament to resilience that no one could deny. The town, once a cage of whispered judgments, began to see us differently, not as outcasts, but as survivors. Mrs. Dilly's visits became less frequent, her eyes softer, the sharp edges of her words blunted by the undeniable truth of what we had built. One evening, Jed and I stood on the porch, the horizon painted in fiery reds and purples. Mercy played nearby, chasing the shadows of the tall pines. I felt the cold breeze on my skin and thought of all that had been lost and gained. "No more running?" I said softly. Jed's eyes met mine, steady and sure. "No more hiding," he agreed. In that moment, I realized that dignity was not a prize given, it was reclaimed, step by step, breath by breath, fight by fight. The cabin, once a refuge from a cruel world, had become a home. The blue blanket with those stitched initials S.J. still lay folded on the shelf, a silent reminder of stories untold and wounds that time might never fully heal. But they were no longer chains. They were the roots from which we grew. I am Bonnie May. I am a mother, a survivor, a woman who once knelt in shame but now stands tall. The scars on my skin are maps of battles fought and won, of pain endured and overcome. The child in my arms is not a sin or a shame, is mercy itself, a promise that even in the harshest places, life finds a way. And Jed, he is the quiet man who stepped out of silence to stand beside men not to save me, but to walk with me. Together, we are a testament to the wild, stubborn grace of hope. In the unforgiving West, where the wind cuts sharp and the nights are long, we have found something rare: peace. The wind moves through the pines like a hymn, soft and steady. The snow falls, covering the past but never erasing it. And here, in this small cabin on the edge of the world, we live not as victims of fate, but as authors of our own story. The night holds us like a secret, and beneath the stars, mercy begins,